So many of the customers, you are facing a growing sprawl of resources spread across multiple data centers, clouds, and edge locations. And customers really tell us that they're looking for a way to inventory, organize, and govern these resources. We announced a major step forward towards this goal with the introduction of Azure Arc. Azure Arc simplifies complex and distributed environments by extending Azure Management across clouds, data centers, and edge locations, as well as enabling the deployment of Azure services to any infrastructure. You can literally organize resources such as Windows or Linux servers, Kubernetes clusters, and Azure services, manage and govern them at scale with powerful scripting tools or the Azure Portal APIs, as well as Azure Lighthouse for all the partners out there, or if you outsource the management of some of your resources to a partner, you can even deploy and manage these Kubernetes container-based applications. It also allows you to easily adopt these DevOps techniques, such as infrastructure as a code, empower developers with self-services and tools, complementing by central IT governance and guidance, and standardized change control with declarative configuration management and system like GitOps. You can also implement Azure Security Anywhere. You can access unique Azure security capabilities such as Azure Threat Detection, centrally manage access and security policies for resources with role-based access control, and enforce compliance and simplify audit reporting. And so when we started out with Azure Arc, we really had these two use cases at the center or at our heart that really helps you with organize and govern across environments, and also the at-scale Kubernetes app management. And with this, I'm going to hand it over to Thomas, who is going to take us through this, how this comes to life for you if you want to get started. Thomas.
Thank you very much, Dave. So yes, as you can see, having a single control plane is a really important part when it comes to your hybrid cloud strategy, right? And a lot of customers are asking about this. Now, we always think, okay, what is the right tool to actually manage all your resources? And as you know from the Azure, managing Azure resources, for example, you know that it can be tricky and challenging if you have many of these resources. And that is why in Azure we use, for example, Azure Resource Manager to organize and manage our resources. And as you can see here, I'm in the all resources blade in the Azure portal, and you can see here everything basically shows up as an object, right? These can be virtual machines, this can be disks, this can be PaaS services, databases, even public IP addresses or network security groups are basically objects, and they're all part of a resource group, a Azure region, and a subscription, right? We can also use tags to do some additional organizing as well. Now, our customer says, this is a great tool to manage all these resources. Why not just use this to also manage and govern resources which are outside of Azure, right? And so to make that a little bit more clear, I'm going to show you that here. I'm going to limit the view here a little bit. And I'm only going to show you Azure virtual machines, as well as servers I joined to Azure using Azure Arc. And no worries, I'm going to show you a little bit how you can onboard servers to Azure using Azure Arc in just a moment. But what I want to show you here now, what we can see here is I can see here all my virtual machines, all my servers, Linux and Windows, running in Azure, as well as my servers running outside of Azure, right? These servers can run on premises in my own data center, at my retail store, in my branch office, but they can also run at another cloud provider as well. And you can see here also the servers here joined using Azure Arc. They're also using the same Azure Resource Manager in the background. So they also are part of resource groups. They're part of Azure regions. They are basically part of an Azure subscription. I can, for example, also use tagging here, for example, for cost management or location taggings. And you can see here some of my servers I have tagged depending on the data center locations where they are part of. They can be in the Zurich data center, the Seattle office, or the New York data center. Basically, to be honest with you, they run all in my lab underneath my desk. But again, they can run wherever they are running, right? And so I can go further and say, okay, hey, now I want to organize my resource a little bit. And in my case, I just want to go out and say, I want to basically use tagging of my resources to find out all the servers which are part of a cost center. So what I can do now here is I already used the cost center tag. So I want to list all my servers which are running and are part of cost center 1001. So I'm going to select this. And you can now see that I can see here my Azure VM as well as my Azure Arc server showing up as part of this cost center, right? And so I can basically go out and organize my resources and manage them and get a great inventory of all my servers, but obviously also other Arc resources as well. Now you may say, okay, Thomas, this is great, but inventory is one thing, right? I also want to actually keep control and manage these resources. So what I want to show you here is a quick part of what we can now do with Azure Policy. And for those who are not familiar with Azure Policy is a way to configure your Azure environment, right? So you can imagine that the cloud is a great place. It gives you a lot of agility. It gives you a lot of speed to deploy new services. However, you as a cloud admin, usually you want to keep control over your environment, right? You want to make sure that, for example, services can only be deployed in certain Azure regions, and they cannot just deploy wherever they want it, right? Another thing could be, for example, naming conventions or what size of virtual machines can be deployed. We have this great thing called the MV2 series virtual machines, which have like hundreds of cores, I think up to 12 terabytes of memory, and they burn your credit card in like 3 seconds. So you don't want everyone in your company deploying these virtual machines, right? You want to keep that control, but still give the people the flexibility. And that is where Azure Policy basically allows you to configure that environment. Now, what a lot of people don't know is there is also something called Azure guest configuration policies. Now, when you want to keep control of your Azure environment, it's not just about Azure, it's also about the virtual machines and servers running inside Azure, so that you can actually configure the operating system the way that they're compliant with your company policies. Now, I'm going to show you how that is done. So usually what you would do is you go out and you do a policy assignment. And here you can see here, I can now go and say, hey, assign a policy, or in my case, I will do an initiative. An initiative is just a collection of policies which have a higher goal. I can then obviously say, okay, this is now, where's the scope? Is that on a subscription level, on a resource group level, or whatever? And then I obviously need to select what I want. And what we have in Azure is we have a set of built-in policies which we give to you, which you can leverage. You can also add your custom policies to do things we don't have in there by default. So if you look at the default ones, you can see here we give you a couple of different policies. These can be not just about like technology requirements, but also if you look at if you have different certification requirements, for example, UK official or UK NHS, and many, many more. You can also see PCI, for example, compliance, FedRAMP, and others. You can basically use these policies to do that. Now, I want to do something very simple. I want to audit all my machines to figure out if they have insecure password settings. So what I would do now is just select this and then basically assign that initiative. Now, since I already have done that, like in a good cooking show, I already prepared that for us because it takes a while to audit my whole environment. So I can now go out and have a look at my compliance state, right? Because I want to see how I'm actually doing. So here I can see all my assigned policies, right? These can be assigned again from myself on my subscription, on my resource groups, but they could even be assigned by top level management to basically say, hey, on a management group level, all my subscriptions need to have that set of policy. And you can see here, I did a great job with a couple of these policies, right? But you can also see I have some policies which I'm not compliant. And here we have the one where I say, hey, audit VMs for insecure password settings. So if I click on this, I can see what is actually not okay. What is that policy about? And I can see here, okay, there are a couple of rules and policies which are not compliant. Now, that is one of the interesting things. But the other thing I'm really interested is now to figure out what resources I'm not compliant. Now, if I click on this, and it will take a while to load, hopefully it loads. Yes, here we go. You can now see here my Azure virtual machines, which are not compliant with this password settings. However, with Azure Arc, we are now also able to have a look at our hybrid virtual machines as well, and basically see that they are not compliant as well. So wherever my server is running, I can also figure out, okay, that server does not have the right policy in place. So how are we doing this? And for that, I want to quickly show you on a slide a quick high-level overview about Azure Management. And no worries, we'll make it super simple. We start on the left side. And we, as basically Azure customers, when we interact with Azure using the portal, PowerShell, the CLI, APIs, the SDK, and whatnot, we are basically interacting with Azure Resource Manager. And Azure Resource Manager is really the magic behind how we can organize and govern and manage our resources running in Azure. So you can see here, Azure Resource Manager brings things like RBAC, logs, subscriptions, policies, tagging, search, all the good things I just showed you, basically to the table. In addition, on top of that, we also have management services like monitoring, updates, backup management, security center, and things like that, which I'm going to show you in a bit, but additionally to that. And until we announced Azure Arc, Azure Resource Manager really was capable of managing our Azure services, right? Didn't really matter if this was an Azure virtual machine, if this was Service Fabric, a Kubernetes cluster, a web app, a database, and so on. We basically used Azure Resource Manager to manage that. Now, what we do with Azure Arc is basically we are extending Azure Resource Manager to manage resources and onboard resources outside Azure, right? So for example, in our case right now, we can onboard servers, Linux and Windows servers running outside of Azure. These can be virtual or physical machines, Kubernetes clusters, and also data services. And we'll talk a little bit more about data services in a bit. And we can onboard these systems and basically bridge them using Azure Arc to the Azure Resource Manager. I hope you see what I did there. So for that, I want to show you a little bit more about Azure Arc and how that actually looks like. So if I go to the portal, I can go to Azure Arc, and you can find here the new basically Azure Arc overview page where you find out how you can onboard more of these resources, right? So again, you can onboard existing infrastructure like Kubernetes clusters or servers. You can also deploy Azure data services and view all of these. So if I go here in the overview page, I can find all my onboarded servers. These are all Azure Arc onboarded resources which live outside of Azure. Now, I want to now manage a server, and I'm going to show you actually what I can do with it right now. So I have here my WAG server. And you can see here, if I go to that, it looks like an Azure resource, right? There's no difference in a way that it's not an Azure resource. It's again, it's joined to a resource group. It's joined to a subscription. You get some additional information. So you find out that this here is joined to a domain, for example, a local domain, which operating system am I running, and so on. And I can then do a couple of things. I can, for example, use the activity log to see what's going on. I can add tags. And most importantly, I can also use RBAC. So I can use role-based access we have for other Azure resources. So I can say, hey, to that server, only certain admins have access to that one to manage that from the Azure portal. Now, this is great because, again, if you have, for example, a team which work with application one or a SharePoint farm, let's say we talk about SharePoint, you only want to give the SharePoint's admin to the servers they actually need access to, right? And that you can do using the RBAC control from Azure Resource Manager. Now, while we're here, we can do a couple of different things, and I really quickly want to show you what is in there. There's much more than I'm going to show you, but very interestingly, obviously, we can connect the log analytics here, so I can access the different logs here on that servers. Now, this uses a service called Azure Log Analytics, which basically gathers all the logs from Azure VMs, but also now from services outside. And you probably say, Thomas, we done that before, right? This is not something new. Yes, we have done that before, but the problem we had, as soon as you onboarded a server to Azure Log Analytics and you gave someone access, you gave access to the whole Log Analytics workspace, which meant he could see the logs from all the servers, right? So in this case now, you can see that the scope is now only selected for that specific server. So I can only see the logs for the server I have actually access to. And then I can run a query. This one, we do a very simple one using the keyword query language, formerly known as Custo, to basically get the update summaries and I get, for example, information around this. Again, this is not just limited. This is basically can be all the logs from all your servers in there. You can find out basically everything, like from performance data to system logs to security logs and much more. We can then also enable insights, which is basically monitoring. So I can go out and see the different endpoints I'm connecting to. For example, I can figure out that this server now connects to something on port 80. I can also see that it ports to some endpoints here on port 443. More interestingly, though, I can also see that he connects to 145, which, for example, in this case, if I zoom in here, you can see here that this server, I can actually figure out that there's a domain controller. So I get this dependency map of connectivities as well. And obviously with Azure Monitor, I get also the performance data here, as you can see, like disk and CPU utilization. Now, again, having that is great. So I get all that information in my Azure portal, wherever that server is running. However, I also have other things like change tracking, inventory, policy, which I just showed you. So here I could basically go out and review all the policies which are assigned to that specific server, and then figure out, okay, what do I need to do to make that server compliant? One thing I want to add, though, is the update management part. So this is one thing I want to show you. As you can see, I can figure out, okay, what are the missing updates on this specific machine? So I can see that. I can then go out and very quickly schedule an update deployment. I'll give that a name. So let's call that the VAC machine deploy. I can then say, okay, what is the reboot options for installing these updates? And then I can go out and on the scheduling task, I can say, hey, I want to update my server now, which basically then kicks off the update process in the next 5 to 10 minutes, or which is probably a better option because I still need that server for our demo here. I'm going to schedule it for a update later on. So I can basically go out and say, okay, later tonight, I want to update that server. And I can even make it a recurring task. So I can say, do that weekly. So my server is always patched. Again, with that solution, I can now patch servers which are running on-prem or running even at other cloud providers like AWS or Google. I can also do some advanced stuff then, like configuring, okay, what updates do I actually want to install? I can include and exclude different updates. I can run pre and post script. So I get some real advanced management here. And then I can create that update deployment to update that specific machine. And you can see here, I now can already use some of the Azure management services we have for our machine here. So with that, I want to quickly switch back to Dave.